Now let's look at how we got the probabilities for the decision tree, the last decision tree that we developed. So when we began the very first case, uh, when we make a decision to build large plant or small plant or no plant at all, the future market could turn out to be favorable or unfavorable, and we simply assumed that the prior probabilities would be 50-50, 0.5 and 0.5. Then later in the last example that we saw, okay, we decided that we're going to hire a consulting company to do a survey and then revise the probabilities of favorable and unfavorable based on what the survey results are. So in that case, if the survey predicted favorable, then we revised the probabilities for favorable and unfavorable market as 78% and 22% instead of 50-50. And if the survey predicted unfavorable market, we revised the probabilities to 27% and 73%. So now how do we get these revised probabilities from 50-50? Okay. And that comes from Bayes' theorem from chapter 2. So let's revisit that and then see how we computed these revised probabilities. Now heading over to Excel. So we're going to define some notations here. Let's call SF survey predicts favorable, SU survey predicts unfavorable market. And FM and UM are actual market, favorable market, unfavorable market. We start out with our prior probabilities for the favorable and unfavorable markets, and in our example we assumed 50-50, 0.5 and 0.5, but it could be something else, but 50-50 is what we assumed. Now from when we decide to hire a consulting company to do a survey, then we look at that past records and we have to come up with these conditional probabilities. So look at in the past all the times when the market was indeed favorable, and then see how often the consulting company predicted favorable market. So survey favorable given the market was actually favorable, and do the same thing when the market was unfavorable. Look at all the past cases when the market was unfavorable, and then see how often the consulting company predicted in the survey was favorable. Okay, once you have these conditional probabilities, then you can multiply the prior and conditional probabilities, and that will give you the joint probability. Joint probability that the survey predicts favorable and market is favorable, and survey predicts favorable and the market is unfavorable. So since these two are mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, the sum of these two joint probabilities will give you probability that the survey will predict a favorable market, and when you divide that into each of the joint probabilities, you get the posterior probability or the revised probabilities for the market conditions. Okay, so let's look at let's put this theory in example form. Okay, so we start out with our initial probabilities, so 50-50, right? So that's 0.5 and that's 0.5. Okay, so now we have to come up with these conditional probabilities, and if we cannot come up with these conditional probabilities, then we cannot apply Bayes' theorem. And usually you will have data available from which you can estimate these probabilities. Okay, so these are the two probabilities that are available to us. The probability survey was favorable given favorable market, and then probability survey was unfavorable given unfavorable market. Okay? But what we want to set up here is probability of favorable market. So survey predicts favorable. So survey predicts favorable market given favorable market. Okay. Now we want here survey predicts favorable market given unfavorable. Okay, so that would be the complement of this. So this is 1 minus that. Okay, the rest is pretty straightforward. You multiply the conditional probability with the prior probability, and you add the two, and that will give you the probability of SF. So that's that. Okay, then you divide the joint probability. I'm going to absolute reference that, and by the marginal probability, and you get the posterior probability. And this is how we get the two probabilities when the survey predicts favorable market. Okay. And we can do the same thing when the survey predicts unfavorable market. So this is again the same 50-50 is what we begin with. Okay. So now we want the probability survey predicts unfavorable market. So P of SU given FM. So that would be 1 minus that. And survey unfavorable, okay, given unfavorable market is that. So this computation is the same here. So I'll just copy paste it here. The posterior probabilities will be that divided by this one. So press the F4 key, then you get 0.27, and this is the probability that we used in the decision tree. So this is how you will compute the conditional probabilities down the line in the decision tree.